up, which is why we brought in Jason Perry, who is the Vice President for Government Relations, as well as the Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the U. So he is extremely knowledgeable about Utah politics. He's worked extensively with policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels throughout his entire career. He is also the host of the Hinckley Report, which is a weekly political discussion that you can find in both in podcast form as well as on PBS Utah. So I definitely feel confident that we have the best person to walk us through some of these important questions ahead of tomorrow's Utah primary election. So I'm just going to jump right into our first question for Jason, which is, given Utah's primary election voting laws, who is able to actually vote tomorrow and participate, as well as who are we voting for?
Mm-hmm. That's the right question to start with, because there are a lot of people on the ballot for this primary election. And what you said at the beginning is right. This is a completely new kind of occurrence with elections in the state of Utah, not just from the laws, but from the complications of the coronavirus as well, which has changed everything in terms of not just how candidates are engaging with the potential voters, but also has impacted how we are able to vote. We are going as a state directly to a mail-in ballot only primary this year. And it's significant that we're doing that because Utah has been leading the way for a long time in the mail-in balloting. When other parts of the state are even debating whether or not it's a good thing or not to do, Utah seems to have found the way to do that and has dramatically increased voter participation in the state. And I know we're going to talk about it probably in a few minutes. I'll talk about what that means for these candidates. But a couple other points that are, I think, important to note. One is the Republicans in the state of Utah have a closed primary. So if you want to vote as a Republican, you have to affiliate as a Republican. And there are a lot of people that have. I'll talk about that more shortly as well. But those that had already affiliated with the Republican Party, for example, received their ballots. Others did as well. For the Democrats in the state of Utah, there are a bunch of candidates for these positions that don't have primaries. So some people may not have received a ballot saying, well, who is my candidate to vote for as a Democrat? Well, you already have your candidate picked because they went through the convention and they were selected as the candidate. So we'll hear more about those people later on as well. But there are a lot of important races and why people, I'm just going to give a little plug why people should be sending in those ballots. We talk about the governor's race, which I know we will, but we have 2 congressional districts that have primaries that are up tomorrow. We have legislative positions, county positions, state school board positions. This is an election that everyone should find a candidate they're interested in and that they can get behind. And maybe before I leave it, Morgan, I know there's a long answer, but one more thing. I've had a chance to talk with the elections officers around the state. And so it is true that you just have to have it postmarked by tomorrow. But for those of you who have been waiting, thinking, maybe I'll wait till tomorrow to turn it in, do it early. Because it is possible if you're like the last box in, and they are coming around to those mailboxes to get it, that it can be postmarked by the next day. So tomorrow is the right day, but get them in early. Don't wait until the post offices are about to close.
Got it. Okay. And don't worry about long answers. You're the expert. That's why we brought you in. We know you know so much. So thank you so much. And let's talk about those 2 Republican gubernatorial frontrunners. We have Spencer Cox and Jon Huntsman. So what are some of the key ways, in your opinion, that these 2 candidates differ?
Well, what's interesting about this election is because we have really qualified candidates, these 2 are, but also Thomas Wright, also Greg Hughes. This has been largely from the Republican side about key issues for Republicans. It has been issue-oriented mostly, which I think has been really great for this election cycle. For people who are watching, they've been able to get answers from these candidates on the various policy issues, I think, pretty well. And I think that's why so many people have affiliated to be involved in this particular primary. But when it comes to these 2 candidates right now, the 2 that you mentioned with Jon Huntsman and Spencer Cox, I think the biggest difference between the 2 of them is really just the nature of their experience. They're both will be approaching this job with different vantage points. And, this is for Utahns to decide if they're voting for on the Republican side of the aisle, what matters most to them. Spencer Cox has a lot of local government experience. He comes from a rural part of the state. He's going to bring that local state government experience to his decision making. Jon Huntsman has been more on the world stage. He was a governor here from the state of Utah as well, so he understands the state issues, but also as an ambassador to Russia, China, Singapore. He's going to bring an international perspective to the business community for the state of Utah. And I think really when people are looking at those 2, as you mentioned, it's mostly going to be a difference of opinion more than a really dramatic difference on their approach to policy. Both of them are talking about economic development primarily. How does Utah not just stay ahead of the other states, but how do you jumpstart an economy that has been impacted in a very serious way by the coronavirus? So I think that's what I would look at with those two candidates.
Okay, great. And you've kind of hinted at this a little bit before, but we have seen a surge in new Republican voters, kind of like you mentioned. We know some of those potential reasons may be Democrats and unaffiliated voters have switched their affiliation so that they are able to participate in tomorrow's primary. So what do you think, what impact might that have?
Well, it's going to have a big impact. I think it's interesting because when you go back to a lot of former election cycles, and some of the studies politics like I do, you always say, well, how many people are going to affiliate, and are they really going to affiliate with the Republican Party to try to help it as opposed to hurt it? Because that's always the theory. Sometimes you get a big chunk of unaffiliated or independent or Democrats. They will affiliate as Republicans just so they can try to pick a weak candidate to go after their preferred Democrat candidate. That is not what's happening in this particular case. It's just so interesting to watch. It has not been a huge number in the past, and that's why people look at it and say, that's not that big of a deal. But in this election, it is, and I'll tell you why. It's the sheer numbers that are coming forward. In the last 6 weeks, there have been just over 70,000 brand new members of the Utah Republican Party in the state of Utah. That's a huge number. And in case you're wondering where they're coming from, that's about 10,000 of those were Democrats that were registered Democrats affiliated as Republicans, but over 42,000 of those people were unaffiliated voters that have decided to join the Republican Party for this primary. There's, about 1,000 were third-party candidates, and, it's about 17,000 Republicans that hadn't voted before are now planning to vote for this particular election. This is significant because we have not had this many people affiliate in this way really in recent memory. I can't remember a time when that's ever happened. So the question is, will that huge number of people joining the Republican Party impact this election? And I'll tell you, it is absolutely going to. In fact, I think it could be the difference.
Wow. Okay, so we talked about some of the Republicans that are running. We also got to talk about the nominee who's already been decided. Utah's Democratic nominee will be Chris Peterson. Can you tell us more about him?
Yeah, I can. There may be a lot of people on campus that have met Chris Peterson already. So he's an endowed professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law, where I'm a graduate of that law school as well. So some students are a contrast, commercial law, consumer protection. A lot of people have had a chance to take a class from him. He's from West Valley. His JD was at the University of Utah Law School as well. I think a lot of folks right now in the state of Utah haven't had a chance to really get to know him well. It's mostly because the state is still trying to figure out who the Republican challenger is going to be. So we'll have a chance to hear a lot more from him going forward all the way until November. He is the Democratic nominee for the governor's position. And so he's also watching closely tomorrow night to see who he will officially be taking on.
Awesome. And if you are just joining us on our Facebook Live, we are joined today by Jason Perry, who is the Vice President for Government Relations and the Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the U. So again, Jason, given your extensive knowledge of and experience with Utah politics, what stands out? We've touched on a few things, but what really stands out to you as making this primary especially unique?
Well, the fact that we have so many candidates is what makes it unique. So for those of you who follow political science in the States and politics, so go all the way back to 2014 when the Count My Vote initiative happened, including some legislation. And that legislation made it possible for people to get on the ballot in two ways. One is you can go through the standard convention process, what they've been doing for so many years. So you go through the Republican convention, your Democratic convention, and if you get a certain percentage of the vote, you get to be the party's nominee. That's how, it's happened for a really long time. But since 2014, you have an alternative path to the ballot, and that's by getting signatures. That means you don't even have to go to convention if you don't want to. You get enough signatures, which is based by statute, and the percentage and number of signatures. You get to be on the ballot representing that party. So this is the first time that we have had, for example, in the governor's race, 4 different candidates. We're used to getting 2. When we do have those, right? We get 2, so you look back on those and what happens, and you got like Governor Herbert in 2016, for example. He ran against Jonathan Johnson, and in the primary he got 72% of the vote. That's a pretty good number. That's not what's going to happen. Since you're talking about what's unique, that's not what's going to happen tomorrow night. You have 4 really great candidates all vying for this seat, and we really could have a Republican nominee that gets 35% of the vote. No one's going to get 50%, I don't think, because of just the nature of where they are in the political spectrum. But that's what's absolutely unique about this election, is that we have so many candidates, and we call this this plurality issue. You have so many different candidates pulling from different ends of the political spectrum. Some candidates are eating each other's voters. Some are trying to pull from the far right, some from the center. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see the results tomorrow night when you have great candidates like this. And the percentages will just be really interesting to watch. And I should say, before I leave it, it's not just the governor's race. We have several candidates. I think we have 4 candidates in the 1st congressional district for those viewers from up north, and in the 4th congressional district, there are 4 candidates there as well, looking to potentially take on Ben McAdams in this next election. This is just an amazing thing to watch, and my hope is it gets people motivated to really participate.
So a high number of candidates and running just during, I think, a really interesting time, right, for our country and for our state. Parting thoughts for Utahns before they head out to vote. Well, not head out. I guess we're voting by mail, so that's another huge one.
Yeah, it's true. But for those that have already mailed in their ballot, my hope is that they stay engaged without question. But it's also interesting to see how things have changed politically, to your really good point about what's happened with this pandemic and how it's impacted politics in the state of Utah. Because people are not able to engage face-to-face, they've been forced to be very creative about it. These are virtual town halls. This is getting your message out through supporters, through people who will endorse you. It's been very interesting that there's not been a lot of opportunity for candidates just to really get face-to-face, and it's required voters to pay pretty close attention in this election cycle to really understand who their candidates are going to be. When you start seeing so many people affiliate, as you and I have talked about already, that shows a high level of participation already. And so I think that we're going to see a record number of people participating in this primary. And for everyone who's watching this podcast right now, this live Facebook event, just stay engaged. Your vote, this particular one, we always talk about how it matters. It really does in this election, more than most of the time that we have seen in the past. Every single one of these ballots matters, and we'll just see how effective people are in reaching the voters.
Awesome. All right. That is it for today. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.